our guest is in the chat. Let me see if I can get her on.
All right.
Oh, we're here finally.
I literally kept clicking. I could hear you. I could see you.
Well, I'm so glad to see you. We figured it out, technology. We did it. Teamwork makes the dream work, Maya.
As it always has, as it always has. How are you, my dear Jerica?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Oh, angry, outraged,
A
and
lot going on.
ready to go.
Yeah. Um, well, let's get started. So I wanted just to say thank you to everyone who has joined us for tonight's Justice Now conversation sponsored by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Jerica Richardson, and I serve as a Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the League. Tonight, we're going to talk about all the many issues that really were brought to bear during the social justice uprising of 2020. As many of you know, tomorrow is the second anniversary of the tragic murder of George Floyd. And I thought I could not think of a better guest to join me in tonight's conversation than someone who is near and dear to my heart, but someone who has been an extremely successful and dedicated advocate, civil rights lawyer and leader in this country for so long, Miss Maya Wiley, who serves as the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference's Education Fund. Maya, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I can't say no to you, to Jerica. So we're doing the Divine Nine evening.
We are representing both of our organizations, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, both of which are member organizations of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights.
Well, I love that. Sisterhood is in the building, and I see you're wearing your red, so I know we are ready to go for this conversation.
Well, it's fuchsia, so that we get the red and the pink.
Okay. So it was a blend of both, so showing love to the AKAs as well. So, well, that is awesome. I mean, there is a lot going on in the world, and I'm really glad to have you on to help us unpack it. So you're in a very new position. You just were named to this position in March. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization, your work, and your vision for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights?
Well, thank you. And thank you for your work at the National Urban League. I know we're fortunate for the National Urban League to also be in partnership as part of this coalition. So look, one, what everyone should know and understand about the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights is it is the oldest and largest coalition of groups and organizations and leaders who care about civil and human rights. We've got 230 organizations as member organizations in this coalition, National Urban League being one, as I said, our own sororities being members as well. But it's 72 years old. It was founded by A. Philip Randolph, sleeping car porters fame, as well as Roy Wilkins from the NAACP. And an important Jewish leader, it's Arnold Arnie Aronson. That's a lot of A's, but was actually really a leader in the Jewish community as well, in recognition that if we were going to advance democracy, and democracy in all that it means, and our people being able to get not only the fundamental rights, like the right to vote and protection of those rights, but economic rights, economic justice. The Leadership Conference helped to organize the March on Washington in 1963. It was already 13 years old when it had done that. It has been the coalition that has fought for and gotten past both every single voting rights legislation we've had since 1965, but also on economic justice, which I think is just so important to name, because we've had unions as part of this coalition since day one, since its founding. And so always worried about and establishing things like protections against employment discrimination, and, you know, protecting workers' rights. But this is a big tent coalition that represents every race, every religion. We have religious organizations as part of the coalition. And the fact that what we recognize is something that's been sort of a mantra for the coalition for decades is, you know, we only win when we work together. And it does take coalition. And so for me in this time, I'm just really grateful for the privilege to be building on this incredible history and the incredibly powerful leaders and organizations that are part of the coalition, so that we can work together to what I call, you know, people, what's your vision? You know, we're in a time when we're trying to save our democracy. And, you know, I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. I mean, it's literally true, right? Our democracy is under attack in this, literally and figuratively. So literally January 6th, it was literally under attack by folks who were trying to overturn an election that was fair and free. But, you know, the fact that we have hate, the kind of hate crimes that we saw in Buffalo, that we've seen against Mexicans in El Paso, as we've seen, you know, in terms of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pennsylvania, against the LGBTQ community in Orlando, that's an assault on democracy when it says that, you know, all of us are not actually part of and can't be safe in and live our lives in our communities. That's an attack on democracy, as is the fight to make sure everybody can take care of themselves and their families, like we're doing on child tax credit and expanding Medicaid. So really for me, it's how do we recognize the moment we're in and recognize how we work together to effectively save democracy so that it works for all of us.
Well, Maya, thank you so much for that. I mean, it really is a privilege. You talked about the history of the Leadership Conference, but I just want to point out how historic your leadership is. You are the first African-American woman to lead this big tent, huge coalition. And we know, if anything, this is the time where we need to continue coalition building. We can't do it as different orgs, single, you know, on our own. We actually do need to work together in partnership. So I want to say thank you for your partnership. And I want to encourage folks that are on with us, if you have questions or comments for Maya, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I have to admit, I have to be honest, I know Maya very well. I had the opportunity to serve under her. She was an amazing boss and mentor for me while we worked for the city of New York. And I just think it's a treat, and I really hope that you all make the most of this opportunity. Maya, so there are a lot of things that we really have to tackle going forward, but I want to take a step back and talk about George Floyd and actually share one of the comments, one of the tweets that you shared in April 20th in 2021. So today, George Floyd received some of the justice in death that he was not given in life. We must do more than just reform policing. We must look at each other and see human beings with hopes, dreams, and wishes. That when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean it. And then you follow that with, the verdict is a moment of justice for the nation. What we do next is up to us. So we did see some semblance of justice with the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. But we've also seen some police killings and a brutality and abuse that did not necessarily have the same outcome. So when you say what we do next is up to us, Maya, what do we do next?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize how much we've done. And I think this is important because we've been in really hard times. People are exhausted. We're very aware of what we haven't won. And sometimes what that does is mask what we have won. So first, let me just say, you know, it is insufficient that we had a murder charge against Derek Chauvin, but it was also historic. You know, it was historic that we got that. And we have to remember that when we saw the protesting that summer, after that incredibly traumatic outrageous video that I think will mark many of us for the rest of our lives, that we saw multiracial and multi-generational people coming out and pouring into the streets to ask for rational reform. And a lot of that are seeing in the context of executive order that the president has, I think today, made public as he is going to sign tomorrow, that one recognizes we got with the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which most people focus on the fact that we didn't get it passed as a nation, and we didn't. But what we did do is we came together, we got that act passed at the House level and to the Senate. That's not a small thing, because when you get legislation that far, it tends to create opportunities to do more. And that's one of the things we're seeing in this executive order, because it's the President of the United States saying, I'm going to do as an executive order for federal law enforcement some of what we didn't get done in legislation. And when the federal government does things like say, we do need a risk management database, we do need to track excessive force in data, we do need to keep white supremacists out of law enforcement, that when the federal government starts to take action, often states follow. But we also saw on the heels of George Floyd a number of states taking action that the federal government hasn't yet, right? This is important. People been fighting at state level. We got to recognize that those state level fights matter. So for example, we've got, states that said, we're going to, like California, that said, you can't be, if you're in law enforcement, a bystander if another law enforcement officer is engaging in excessive force or misconduct. That matters, because one of the reasons we haven't seen enough justice and prevented more misconduct is that there hasn't been a legal obligation on police to police each other. And this change matters. It is also one of the things that the Department of Justice at the federal level has just done, is said in its rulemaking, it's just said, we're going to make sure our officers know at the federal level that they're responsible if they see a police officer, even if it's not a federal police officer doing wrong. You have an obligation to intervene if there's a constitutional rights violation happening. These things matter because we didn't have them before George Floyd. We didn't have them before we protested. We didn't have them before we had, the legislative process on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And it also gives us the opportunity to continue to fight for the things we have not yet gotten, and recognize that people still want and believe in, a majority of people, in safe, fair, and non-racist policing, because none of us are safe if any member of service of the police department or law enforcement can simply ignore the Constitution or the laws. So I just want to say we've done a lot. One more thing, New Jersey, and I don't think it's the only state, but New Jersey, I know near and dear to your heart, my dear, Governor Phil Murphy has a bill on licensing police officers. And by the way, some police unions have supported this, where there's actually a statewide licensing for police officers. That is a game changer, because we talk about how people can get in trouble and leave one police department and then go get a job in another. Well, at least if you're in state and you're tracking it, you actually have a way of tracking whether or not someone should get a job somewhere else within your state. But it also helps you identify whether there's someone who should be removed from the police department if they're not keeping up with their licensing. That means they're training. That means on social media, they're advocating the overthrow of the United States government. These are all things that get measured in the licensing process if this legislation gets passed in New Jersey.
I think that's a terrific example. And I think it's also a reminder that this is not just a top-down or a bottom-up approach. We have to do both. We have to continue to fight on the federal level. So we are heartened by what we saw happen in the House. And we do need people to take that momentum and that protest and their activism that we saw in 2020 and head to the polls again, so that we get members in the Senate who are willing to listen to the voice of the people and actually get a comprehensive policing reform bill passed that will be meaningful.
Can I just make that such an important point? And you just added and made better the point I was trying to make, Jerica, which is no surprise that your smart and incisive mind would do that.
I learned from the best.
Because I also think we have to remember, we assume, those of us who are in the work, right, and in the trenches, assume that everyone knows what we've won, or that even when we lost, like in the case of the House passing the laws we wanted, but losing them in the Senate, that means there's an opportunity to win them in the Senate and we get engaged. Really important to say that to folks, because a lot of folks aren't tracking it, so they just think we're always losing. Well, there's not a whole lot of reason to vote if you think it doesn't matter. But the gains we've made is because we had historic turnout in 2018 and historic turnout in 2020. So just wanted to underscore your really important point.
Well, thank you for that. I think you and I could go on and talking about policing and what needs to be done. You know, I just appreciate your leadership at the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, where well, thank you. I mean, because we can see the through line from the tragic death of Eric Garner, where unfortunately we were not able to get justice in the criminal sense, but we were able to get the officer removed from the force in the administrative sense because of civilian review boards. So when we say to folks, what can you do? You can be involved in policing accountability in your local communities. That's one of the things the National Urban League has put forth in our 21 pillars for redefining public safety and restoring community trust, and establishing and strengthening civilian review boards so that the people really have a stronger role in the accountability process. Maya, I want to turn to really recent events. I know that the challenges of gun violence in our communities, but also challenges of combating domestic extremism, I think are in everyone's minds as we think about Buffalo, and then the news that we're hearing out of Texas this evening. What are your thoughts on what should be done on the federal, state, or local level on gun violence generally, and how we address that? But also, should there be a federal bill against hate crimes?
So, so many important angles to this. Let me try to simplify into a couple of big demands, because there are many, right? Like every big problem, there's not a single solution. There's no single bullet. You need to do multiple things. But they're really important big things to do. One is recognize that gun violence, yeah, of course we need gun reform. Of course we do. And until we're voting folks out that won't support gun sense, we're not going to get them. So we do have to vote. But putting the issue of illegal guns and legal guns aside, you know, when it comes to gun violence and when it comes to hate, there's some common denominators that we need across the board. One, we need, and I know a lot of folks have been talking about, a whole of government response. And what that really means is we need to be building up and supporting community-based organizations that are actually engaged in interrupting violence before it starts, or identifying problems and having places to direct people who are troubled, or having community-based mediation that stops violence before it happens. These, I'm not talking about fluffy things that just sound good. I'm talking about things that have happened, they've been done. There's research and support that shows that it prevents violence, reduces it, stops it from happening before it happens. And some of that is happening. You know, I do want to say that, you know, there are some community-based grants, for example, of Department of Homeland Security to help support resiliency for groups that are more often targeted, communities more often targeted by hate. But but part of what we need is mandatory reporting. We do have hate crimes legislation at the federal level. And this administration helped get that done in the form of, both community grants, but also making it clear that they were going to start tracking COVID-19 related violence incidents. But also, you know, it's been really important to make tracking that and data reporting mandatory, because what we have on hate crimes right now is voluntary reporting by police departments to the federal government. Only 40% of police departments are reporting that data. And sometimes that reporting even when they're reporting, they're not reporting all their hate crimes as hate crimes. So there are hate crimes that are not getting recorded as hate crimes in the first place. That should be mandatory. This is something the Leadership Conference and all our partners are pushing for. Makes a huge difference, because if you don't know where the problem is prevalent, you can't intervene sufficiently in preventing it. The other thing that I have to say about one of the things that's important in all of government response is, the federal government under Obama had an interagency task force. And this is an opportunity for this administration to bring that task force back so that there is better alignment. And we have to be really supporting with government, at the federal level, grants that incentivize states and local governments to change what they're doing, so that they're actually investing in this multi-pronged approach, building up community-based organizations, particularly if they're Black, particularly if they're Muslim, particularly if they're LGBTQ, particularly if they're Jewish, the groups that are most targeted, so that they can be in better position to prevent and identify. But we also have to do that in schools. So this is true of gun violence, but it's also true of hate. So often it's about trouble. People who are in trouble and troubled. That's not a defense. I'm not talking about a defense on a criminal level, but what I am talking about is identifying a problem before it becomes a life-ending problem. We know from the Buffalo that shooter was in trouble before he picked up that gun and killed Black people because he became a white supremacist. And disinformation. We need to track disinformation. We need more tools to hold tech companies, social media platforms accountable around whether or not they're interrupting the disinformation that leads to this kind of violence and hate. But we also have to make sure communities are better able to identify what disinformation is, what it looks like, and the way communities can counter it. Unless we have all of government response and ensuring that communities have the power and the resources to step up and do what they need to do, we won't have a sufficient grasp on the problem. But all those are problems we can solve.
Wow, Maya, there is so much to unpack, but I think you really lifted up some important pieces. I can't end this conversation without talking about abortion. We have seen the leaked Supreme Court decision, and we really want to get your thoughts, because as we talk about what can community do, what can we as everyday people do, advocates, to attack some of these issues and really address them. I think this is a really important one for so many, but especially diverse communities of color, absolutely women. So
yeah.
If you could share a few thoughts on what we're hearing now about what's happening on the federal level, but also really what can, transpire on the state level because of it.
Yeah. Well, one thing that everyone can do is vote, and vote your conscience in terms of what leaders are promising to do around protecting fundamental rights, like our rights to control our bodies and our decisions, including abortion. One of the things that we know, I was just talking to a member of the Senate today who rightly said, those of us who are in here doing as much as we can can't do it alone, right? We can't expect people who are elected to office to be the only solution, but it does matter to put good people in office. But the flip side in terms of what we should do on our end is organize. So there are folks organizing around protecting clinics, because we do have violent threats against clinics. Those who can open their pocketbooks and give money to providers in community, particularly in underserved communities. Black women, 5.3 million Black women, 5.3 million stand to lose the ability to make a choice about forming their families and about when they have a child. And we have to say this because this is also a healthcare issue, right? What this opinion sets up is really also dismantling healthcare infrastructure that serves women. And in Black community, we're talking 3 to 4 times as likely to die, pregnancy-related deaths. Yet we have states that are starting to say, even if it threatens the life of the mother, we're going to say you can't get one. So that's critically important for folks to recognize. Got to support our providers. So if you have money to donate to them. If you have the ability to show up and be part of the protection force, at clinic doors, do it. But the other thing is there are going to be the organizing of rallies and protests across the country. We're actually having a planning call. A lot of the groups, including National Urban League, I know will be participating. We're doing a silent protest tomorrow at the Supreme Court. But the point is showing up and showing we are the majority, right? 6 in 10 Americans say all or some or most of abortion access should be protected as a fundamental right. That's the majority of the country. But I think the other thing we have to recognize, and I just want to say this because it is so important to recognize the connection between this fight on our fundamental bodily control and racism and hate. Because the origins of the attack on Roe v. Wade didn't start with Roe v. Wade. In fact, the evangelical right did not start fighting to overrule abortion until 6 years after Roe v. Wade was adopted by the Supreme Court as a fundamental right. And the reason was because of segregation academies and the segregationist stance of some in the evangelical community. And this became a wedge issue. So I say that because we should understand it for what it is and understand the draft opinion for what it represented, which is it's not just what it sets out on abortion, it's what it sets up to come for all of our fundamental rights. Because the framework was, if it's not written and enshrined in the Constitution, we can do away with it. It's not a fundamental right. If I took you through, and you know this, Jerica, because you also have a law degree, but if we took the public through all of the things they consider to be their due process rights that aren't named in the Constitution, that maybe didn't happen in 1787, there are a whole lot of ways that even on things like criminal justice, we can lose ground if we're not all standing up and fighting, saying, you can't come for us. So the protest matters, standing up matters, and recognizing that we're standing up both for abortion, but we're also standing up for our fundamental rights that say, you don't get to tell us that all the progress we've made in this country can get rolled back by a stroke of your pen because you would rather live in 1787 because that worked better for you.
Wow.
Than 2022.
Wow, just drop the mic, Maya, why don't you? I mean, it's so important, and thank you for being able to connect all the dots for us, because I think it's very easy for people to look at hate crime in terms of race, or look at abortion in terms of gender, or policing. I mean, they're all connected, and really it's just highlights the work that we need to do. And as you said before, if we're talking about protests, that is something that we need to do continually. And it doesn't just stop at the protests. We have to head to the polls, but then we also have to turn protest into policy. And so I'm thankful for the work of the Leadership Conference and bringing us all together and making sure we are working in a united way and really representing all Americans, and making sure that folks really see justice and feel justice in their daily lives, irrespective of their skin color, who they love, their religion, or any other status. I think it's incredibly important that we do that. I know you are a very busy woman, and we'd love to have you back again, because there's so many other things that we didn't even scratch the surface of today.
You know I will be back, and I do just give an additional shout. One, I am so proud and privileged to call you a friend and colleague, Jerica. I want to say that. And I'm so grateful to the National Urban League, both for the State of Black America, that is a critical document on how we're doing and what to do about how we can be doing better. But also the blueprint from this year, I think, was a particular stellar and critical document. So I hope it's dropped in the chat. I hope everybody looks at it, because it's also concrete, calls our attention to what we need to look at, but also with real concrete recommendations and steps. So it does take all of us, and it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful to be in the position to be able to work with you and with Mark Morial, my dear friend as well, but all the other leaders in this coalition. and all the other communities that it represents, because it really is going to take all of us.
Thank you so much, Maya. I have one more question for you. How can folks get connected and with the Leadership Conference in Civil and Human Rights? Can they follow you on social media? Where should they go?
So we're on social media, and you can sign up on our website, which is civilrights.org. But you can also go to social media. We're on Instagram, obviously right here, Civil Rights. And we're usually, if you put in Civil Rights, you'll probably find us. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're also on Twitter. So Civil Rights is the way you will find us. But you can sign up as well as track the social media space for announcement, for ways to get engaged. And signing up on the website is a great way to also make sure you're hearing from us through email.
I love that. And for those of you who are not following Maya or the Leadership Conference, I encourage you to do so. She's very good on social media. She talks about a lot of interesting things. I'm telling you, you would just have a ball reading her tweets. You will learn and you will also laugh. And so that's just my shameless plug, because I enjoy what you have to say, Maya. And thanks to all of you who joined us. I think we learned so much from this conversation. You have left us full, and we look forward to getting another plate from you later.
Well, I just look forward to sharing the table.
Well, we love that. And that's what it should be about, right? We all want to make sure, not that we just have a seat at the table, that we are building tables so that folks can be a part of this work and this leadership. So with that, thank you, Maya, and to all of those who have tuned in. Remember, the time for justice is always now. Take care.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.